Right, so just a quick recap. We've already done our starter, and the two questions on the starter were, why do we make art, and then why do you make art, making it more personal to you. And just again, Mrs. Freno, for you, in case you're not sure about what they would say, of course we've had express yourself, convey a sense of meaning, make a point, a statement. It could be to incite people to riot. It doesn't matter what it is, but the fact is it's a communication. So Origins is our exam title. It's 40% of the course. It will take us about 11 weeks. And in that time, Mrs. Freno and I have devised a route through that idea. Now, when you see the word origins, and particularly when you see it in combination with from the cave and leaving a trace, what's the first thing that's going to come to your mind? Cave painting. Right, okay. So if we think about our most ancient ancestors, we know that even they were invested in making marks on surfaces. And the reason why they did that, of course, was to leave a trace. It was to tell stories. It was to make sure that the people who came along after them would understand something of their world. There's a lot of social anthropology goes into the study of cave paintings, not least because actually, can we ever really be sure why those ancient Paleolithic peoples wanted to leave their marks? We can only assume that's because they wanted to communicate something about their lives. Oliver?
When I think of origins, I think of inspiration.
Absolutely. I mean, we are inspired as artists. We have the muse with us all the time because we make things. We have to have that level of inspiration. If we think back to the Paleolithic period, the Stone Age, it's really important that you understand that the advent of non-utilitarian mark making is something that drives all of art even now. So if you want to take notes, that's actually quite a good phrase to remember, is that art is only art when it becomes non-utilitarian. And what that means is that it's not there for the function of usability. It's not there just to signpost. It's there to be something that is other. It emerged about 100,000 years ago. So I don't know about you, but I find it hard to conceptualize 1,000 years. I find it even harder to conceptualize 10,000 years, and I find it almost impossible to conceptualize 100,000 years ago. Primarily, we know that those ancestors were dwelling particularly in caves in Africa and later on in Europe. In fact, some of the best preserved archaeological sites for mark making on the surfaces of cave walls is actually in Germany. I don't know if anyone's ever been to the caves in the south of Germany. Early art forms included body adornment, simply the use of pigments, cave paintings used for communicative purposes. So I guess that is a use, but non-utilitarian means that there was a spark of something that was to do with story, it was to do with a sense of self and identity that was new. Don't forget, the movement from Neanderthal into Homo sapien meant that we became quite literally more enlightened in our minds. So again, time-wise, you don't ever need to know this. I'm not going to ever test you on this. But I do think it gives real gravitas to the consideration of people who lived 3 million years ago. I mean, that's eons of time, as I've already mentioned, that practically inconceivable to us. They created art that focused on large wild animals. Does anyone know why there was an interest particularly in making marks or adornments that might have been about things like bison? Does anyone know why? Yeah.
Maybe it could have been warnings, or maybe they were sharing hunting tactics or things to be aware of.
Absolutely. This is about sharing.
Yeah.
If you make an image of a bison, it tells the story of your people who hunt bison. It also acts as some kind of instruction, like a manual for other people who might come along later. Don't forget, if we want to share information, we speak to each other in language that we understand. We are right next to each other. Nomadic peoples, people who lived many, many thousands of years ago, might not have seen other people that much. They might not have been sure that other people actually existed outside their own small band. And if they did exist, they might have been a threat. So it's quite an interesting and maverick way for Homo sapiens to start actually making these marks to communicate. rock art includes pictographs, petroglyphs, engravings, petroforms, all these things, geoglyphs. Fascinating things. Sometimes you might walk past them in museums, but actually they are the crucible for what we think of as art now. So it helps shed light on daily life, of course. The fact that these people's made cave paintings that were about hunting and about nature tells us that that was essentially their life. The fact that they also incorporated the rock's natural contours is really interesting for us because it tells us that there was an understanding and an appreciation of form that was transposed from two-dimensional to three. And we didn't see something similar to that shift in conscious movement of conceptualization way into what I think of as the modern period in like the 11th century. So this is a huge movement to start making marks. By the way, of course, our evidence for this as art historians is really corrupted because, of course, not everything ancient is retained. And isn't that something that's both poignant and kind of amazing? That over time, what we make degrades and it will end. So as surely as our lives are going to end, sometimes the surfaces that we mark upon will erode, or the marks we make will fade. All this stuff feeds into the fact that even art preserved for many thousands of years isn't infallible. It can still waste away. And perhaps if we think to our future selves and we think about when we make the marks on the surfaces we choose to work upon, do we ever consider what the legacy is that we leave behind and whether it matters to us that somebody 1,000 years, 10,000 years from now will actually know something of us? And I ask you that now because it is something interesting, I think, to think about. Are you aware that there could be a moment far in the future when somebody happens upon something that you have made and where there is suddenly a communion across a vast span of time that tells somebody in the future something of you now? It's very difficult for us, again, to conceptualize about the possibility of legacy because we are alive now, we're in the moment. But when you're making, and even if it's not the purpose of your making, I wonder if we can all say that the art we make, whether it's photographic or painting or drawing, has a capacity to inform for a vast span of time, location, just by something as simple as a single mark. Anyway, the other thing I want us to think about is the fact that these mark-making endeavours were in caves. And that's why, of course, they're retained, because they've not been corrupted by the everyday erosion that we'd find through rainfall and sunlight and so on. Caves are dark, they're dangerous, they're unstable. Also, caves would be places of visions and experiences that were sacred and profane in some way. So yes, they would be spaces for people simply to stay safe within, but the cave also itself is a metaphor for something that is the Paleolithic version of religious. So if you believe that a deity dwells within the cave that you enter, there is a sense that you might enter into the world or a realm in which you could be healed, or where you could be transported, where you could be made good. All these things collide with not just the cave painting, but the cave itself. And actually, if we think more broadly, even now, caves are spaces that we move into or go inside, are places where sometimes we might seek shelter, but also where we might find comfort, where we could be certainly kept safe, but also psychologically cleansed somehow. I don't know if you've heard of this, but something that has become more popular again, I would say in the last 5 years, people doing completely silent retreats, and not only silent retreats, but completely dark retreats, where people enter specialized spaces that are soundless and lightless. And how many people...
Yeah, when I went caving, I went down like really far. No, we turned towards off and it was like, no, that's not it.
No, but that's amazing actually. Maisie, can you say that? Because I don't think the camera will have picked that up. So Maisie has been caving.
Yeah, and I went like really far down.
Yeah.
And like, it was like a massive thing. And the lady made us like turn all our torches off and like sit complete silent. You couldn't see anything.
How did that feel?
I don't know, it's weird.
Weird. I think part of our experience of being is that we're in spaces usually where we can see at least something and where we can hear at least something. And so in the cave, when you take away light, you take away vision. And when you take away sound, you take away like the auditory perception of space. It can be not only really uncomfortable, but it can also be terrifying. Really terrifying. I didn't realise, but I don't think I've got sound. Or maybe I do. Let me just try this. I want you to think that caves are like portals into the deep past. So when we're looking at cave paintings, again, it's not just that we're looking at cave paintings that happen to be in caves, but we're also making a point through this notion of origins, thinking that the cave was somewhere that our ancient selves would have gone to experience something that was vital. Again, as simple as safety and shelter, but also as complex and as meaningful as something that's sacred. Some of you will know this, especially if you've been taught by me when you were much younger. But one of the loveliest stories I know is the World War II story about boys going into the cave to have a cigarette and striking the match. This is in Lascaux in France. Striking the match, they'd stolen cigarettes off one of their dads, I think, and they went into the cave and they struck the match to light the cigarette. And they noticed when they illuminated the space that there were all these markings. And so one of the greatest discoveries of kind of modern archaeology was made by accident. And also it was occupied France at the time, it was in the Second World War, so they were terrified if they told someone that not only they'd get in trouble for taking the cigarettes and having a smoke, but also the fact that they were going to be incarcerated because they'd gone out, I think, after curfew or something like that. So there's lots of anecdotes and stories around finding cave paintings. And now I'm going to switch immediately into the modern period where we're looking at an artist like Antony Gormley. Now there's a good reason why I'm sharing Gormley with you now. You might know him because of Angel of the North. That's probably one of the most famous landmark monumental pieces of sculpture that he's made. But the British sculptor Gormley is famous not just for Angel of the North, but also generally for casting his own body as a means of making figurative presences across the landscape. So some of you might have seen his work in the bowels of Winchester Cathedral in the crypt. A lone figure that stands there, and as the water level rises in the crypt downstairs at Winchester Cathedral, so too does the sense that the figure might be drowning or disappearing. But he also made a really fantastic BBC documentary called How Art Began. I'm going to set that as something I want you to watch. You can't get it on iPlayer any longer, so I'm going to give you the knockoff YouTube version. Sorry about that. But it is a really, really amazing documentary about how preconceived ideas about the origins of art have changed over time with greater discovery, greater technology, greater scientific advancement, but also what it means to make discoveries about our origins as artists. So when we think about what creativity is, I don't think that creativity will be any different for us now compared to what it would have been like for people then. The format will be different, the materials is different, the location is different, but the act of creativity is fundamentally the same. There's something incredibly humanizing about that when we realise that even the most ancient of our ancestors would have had that same spark of inspiration that we ourselves might feel now. I want you to think when you're watching the documentary, I'll put it in teams, how Gormley examines the prehistoric hunter-gatherers to connect with modern, emotional and human-focused sculpture. Because one of the initial artist researches you're going to do is going to be on Antony Gormley. And I'm going to lay out in a minute what you will need to do in the coming week so that you know exactly what you can get on with whilst you're over here independently. Gormley is also really interesting in terms of hands, by the way, and if you remember, if I just scoot back for a minute, the ancient spit paintings that are some of our earliest markers of the fact that people wanted to create the sense they had a presence, they lived. He's all about that himself. He understands that the hand is this representative kind of metaphor for not just making the mark, but actually then for life. I mean, our hands are in use daily. If we're lucky enough to be so-called able-bodied, we know that we use our hands for absolutely everything we do. I mean, look at me now. I'm standing here and I don't have a lectern or something to hold on to, so I'm probably flailing about wildly, and I apologise. I know it can be distracting. But I also know that I use my hands to feed myself. I use my hands to salute to people. I use my hands to embrace my daughter. I use my hands to communicate all the time. And actually, much as I'm speaking to you, and much as it might look a bit weird if I was standing here silently flailing about, the fact is, sooner or later, I bet I could communicate with you using just my hands. I mean, if you annoyed me, I could slap you. If you did something amazing, I could give you jazz hands, or I could give you thumbs up. Hands are actually part of our language. So Gormley understands this, and he also understands that as the master maker, the hands are the thing that make the mark. They help shape the form. They help leave the trace. They help us travel through that cave, and they help us to navigate the space that we otherwise might find overwhelming. Maisie, I don't know about the caving experience that you had, but did you put your hands out a lot? Can you remember?
You had to like climb things as well, so I had to use my hands.
So you were using your hands to scrabble through. Has anyone ever been suspended in midair?
Yes.
I think one of the impulses we have if we're suspended is to put our hands out. Now that's obviously again about safety. There's lots of relationship then between the hands and the cave. It's also simply because the hand is the declaration of being. So I do want you to write that down. The hand itself is a declaration of being. So as I said, I'm going to put this into teams. I want you to watch it. We will come back and we will talk about it next Monday. And one of the other reasons why we're talking about Gormley is not just because he has a fascination with thinking about his physical being orientated in a wider landscape or space, not just because he has done a lot of work that are about hands particularly, but it's also because of this. So he has made an installation, a variety of different places, but particularly in the Royal Academy, where he has been making a giant installation called Into the Cave. And you're going to find out about that from me. So from that giant installation in which you enter a dark space and you travel around essentially a giant body space of someone's interior world, he made images that look like this. Now, they're minimalistic in so many ways. They're printed, so they're repeatable. They're also something about the kind of endeavour of emerging from the cave. And again, if we're thinking metaphorically, we might think that, as I've written there, the cave itself becomes a symbol, the expression of an individual story. Somebody very special to me a long time ago told me that the best thing I could ever do in my life was to cultivate my inner world. And I've always found that really interesting, because when you cultivate your inner world, you're essentially designing the walls of your cave to sustain you in dark times, to support you through tragedy, to help you face adversity. If you're somebody who's constantly out of the cave in the light, you're never addressing the dark part of yourself. And we tend to conflate the dark part of ourselves as something that's bad. It absolutely isn't. It's the full expression of who we are as humans. So when we think of the cave as this metaphor, and we also think about leaving a trace, I want us to think that we allow ourselves to emerge from the cave, but inside the cave, where all our amazing cave drawings are, is actually the language of who we are and the space where we can feel most at home. So origins. We have come from this place that is described by the ancient cave paintings of our Paleolithic ancestors. We also come from our burgeoning consciousness, which emerges from real darkness into something that's light, but at any time of our choosing, we could retreat to again. Things you are going to do are going to respond to this quote particularly. And again, I'm going to put my presentation from today into Teams as well, so you don't need to worry about copying everything down frantically. Antony Gormley asked what images from millennia ago can tell us about who we are. As he says, if we can look closely at the art of our ancestors, perhaps we will be able to reconnect with something vital that we have lost. When you think about your new books, there are going to be a couple of things I want you to start with. I obviously want you to put origins, and I want you to put leaving a trace, perhaps into the cave. I also want you to do a page or a small amount at least of research into those ancient archaeological finds, those things that give us the credence of what we're talking about today. I want you to think, what have we lost? That means that Gormley, a sculptor who's very interested into the cave and hands and leaving traces and marks everywhere, what does he think we've lost? What do you think we might have lost that we should be returning to? What does art help us find? It's very similar in some ways to the question I asked at the outset. And will we leave a trace for others to look for? If you're someone who's already a famous artist and you make work, is there a consciousness that you might be leaving something for somebody way in the future to find? Or is it much more immediate than that? When you make your paintings or your photographs, are you happy that people tomorrow will see what you've made? Are you happy that people next week will see what you've made? Would you be amazed, stunned, inspired, or driven on in some way if you thought that 1,000 years from now, somebody would see what you'd made and it would make an impact on them? So what will those people think when they find the trace that you leave behind? Now, more broadly, of course, we could think, how do we leave traces now? Now, we're going to use a number of symbols. Symbol 1 is going to be the hand. Symbol 2 is this idea of darkness in the cave. And so for both photographers and fine artists, we're going to begin with a record of the hand as it emerges from darkness. Now, if I was drawing, I'd be drawing on a very, very dark ground, and I would be highlighting, as if with a partial spot, the contours of only parts of the hand. I would also be thinking very carefully and cleverly about what the hand is doing. I would be thinking that the hand would probably be stretching out. Now, if you go further on this, then you're going to think about foreshortening. You're going to think about the drama that the hand can create. A hand that's clenched is powerful, but the hand that's outstretched is poignant. It's emerging from the darkness. It's coming out from that cave. Photographers, I want you to make a beautifully illuminated hand. And actually, fine artists, you're going to do photographs about this as well. So, as an example, I want you to create the hand that makes the trace. I want you to think that the cave looms, the light is spare, and the story emerges over time. If I was going to finish what I've started, I would say that the story emerges over time because we come out from within, and also that someone or something else is allowed to enter. Much like those boys smoking in the caves of Lascaux. Who is going to enter the cave to find the story you want to tell them? So perhaps today there's an element of riddle in what I'm saying to you, but I'm sure your brains are already churning about the following things. You are going to be looking at origins, from the cave, leaving a trace. You are going to be thinking that our ancient ancestors were determined to make marks on surfaces. You're going to question why they did that and why you still today do something remarkably similar, either through photographic printing, through drawing, through painting, or through sculpture. I want you to consider what it tells an audience when you make a mark about a particular thing, when you tell a story through your images. I want you to think about your future great grandchildren and beyond, and what they might find about you in the marks you make now, whatever that is. I would love you to also, and I'll put this in, to look at Esther Shipper, who makes immersive AI installations about travelling through the caves of our ancient ancestors. So there's a video on there you can have a look at. I want you to be inspired by her, and I also want you to be inspired by Gormley. Gormley is the big deal for this. You're going to look at his documentary. You are going to think about the presence of the hand in his work, but also the cave and how important that is. And you're going to look at his work called Into the Cave. Again, I'm going to list all of this on Teams for you, and ultimately the hand. Okay? Are there any questions about this? Does anyone know, by the way, how to make one of those cave painting-like handprints? Do you know how they did it?
Painting on the hand.
No.
Because they did it around the outside.
They did it around the outside, you're quite right. They made a silhouette. They did it by chewing up things
Berries.
like... Huh?
Berries.
Chewing up things like berries or other things that would have a high pigment, and they would spit around their hand.
Oh, that's kind of gross.
Should we do that? Maybe you stand in front of them
Oh, I
and
don't
spit
know,
around
germ
your face.
situation.
There you go.
But
Actually not.
You can always wash off of this.
you can, Oliver, that's quite right. But I wouldn't like that. I don't
Don't do it in
think.
school grounds, go on.
You didn't know they were gone, let's be real. You enjoyed it.